All right, hey folks, welcome back. So we're on to chapter 3, which covers demand and supply. Um, I guess, let's see, let me tell you, I think I've mentioned before that the software I use to do these videos only allows me to do a 10-minute video. I'm limited to 10 minutes. This is probably one of the longer chapters, so I'm probably going to end up making 2 videos. So you'll probably see a part 1 and a part 2 for chapter 3. But let's jump right in and start talking about demand. So demand is the buyer side of the market. Anybody who is a buyer is a demander of a good or service in the economy. And key concept is that demand itself is a relationship between two variables, two things that can change, the price of the product and the quantity demanded. Another way of thinking of demand is it's just your basic desire to have something given your income. But really, the important part here is it's a relationship between price and quantity. So look at the first bullet point. Demand is never a single number. A single number is probably quantity demanded, which is the quantity that's demanded at a certain price. So it's a point on a demand curve as opposed to a demand curve itself. So demand as a whole is a whole relationship between price and quantity. I'll talk more about that in a minute. It is a relationship, and specifically it's a negative or inverse relationship, because as price goes up, the quantity demanded is going to go down, and vice versa, all other things remaining equal. That is, by the way, what this little Latin phrase means. Ceteris paribus literally means all other things equal. So the law of demand is an important part of this chapter, and it tells us just what I said. As other things remaining equal, as price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and vice versa. As price goes down, quantity demanded goes up. That should make sense. That's sort of just common sense. So demand itself can be expressed as an equation, a graph, or a table. So let me show you those. There is a mathematical equation describing a demand curve. We're not really going to work with those, but here's an example. Price equals 200 minus 0.5. I'm using QD for quantity demanded. And if you plug in these numbers over here in the table into that equation, you'll see that if you plug in the quantity demanded of 100, you get a price of 150 and so on. So the table in the middle here kind of shows you a few points that are part of that equation. It also corresponds to the points on this graph at the right. So those are 3 different ways of expressing demand. Most of the time, what we're going to do in this class is look at graphs like the one on the right. So based on the law of demand, a demand curve should always have a negative slope because there's that inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So again, remember that demand is this whole curve, this whole equation. I'm going to ask you at some point a trick question on an exercise or a mini quiz or a quiz that says, all right, if the price is 80 and the quantity demanded is 250, what happens to demand if price goes up to 100? And somebody's going to want to say, well, demand decreases, but that's not true. Demand is this whole curve. That hasn't changed. What's happened if the price increases like this is the quantity demanded decreases, not the demand itself. So that's an important distinction. It's really tricky. Demand and quantity demanded are 2 different things. So there are actually some things that will change demand. And when I say change demand, that means we're shifting the entire demand curve. That means, for example, that even at a price, the same price of $60, more is going to be bought, more will be demanded. So no matter what the price, more gets purchased. That's what is meant by an increase in demand. So some examples of things that might shift demand in this case. This example is looking at the graph for Coke. So if new research shows that Coke prevents cancer, more people are going to be drinking Coke. Even if the price doesn't change, people will drink more of it. Increasing population could do it. More people means more buyers out there in the market. Or if a competitor like Pepsi goes out of business, any of those things can increase the demand for Coke. But notice that in all those cases, we're saying that even if the price doesn't change, more stuff gets bought. So in general, here's a list that is in chapter 3, and it's in your study guide as well. Remember, you don't actually have to read chapter 3 unless you feel like you need to. But Here are things that will actually shift a whole demand curve to the right or the left. Preferences of buyers. So anything that changes people's tastes and preferences. It could be trends or fads or new information, anything like that. Price and availability of related goods and services. So related goods and services could be either substitutes or complements. So substitutes are pretty obvious. Coke and Pepsi are substitutes. But complements are things that are normally bought and consumed together. So maybe for some people that's Coke and potato chips. Maybe it's beer and pizza. Maybe it's gin and tonic, peanut butter and jelly. But those things that kind of move together, those are complements. So it's tricky because a change in the price of peanut butter doesn't change demand for peanut butter. It moves us to a different point on the demand curve and changes the quantity demanded. But if more people are buying peanut butter because of a lower price, some of those people are going to buy more jelly to go with their peanut butter. So it actually will shift the demand for jelly. So kind of tricky. Anyway, on down the list. Income is another thing that will shift demand. More income just means in general you can buy more of the things that you want. That's true for most goods, normal goods. But there's also a class of goods called inferior goods. And those are the things that basically you only buy when you don't have a lot of money. And as your income goes up, you start buying less of them. As your income goes down, you buy more of them. So inferior goods might be things like generic brands of things, generic brand drugs, or cereal or something like that. So, maybe you've been buying the Hannaford brand Tostitos, but when your income goes up, you spring for the real name brand Cheerios, something like that. So in that case, Hannaford brand stuff would be an inferior good. Cheerios would be a normal good. Demographic and population characteristics can change demand, just partly through, more population usually means more demand, but it can also be changes in the population, such as the aging of the population. All these older baby boomers are increasing the demand for healthcare, for example. And then last, buyer expectations of the future. So if you expect different conditions in the future, you might change your buying habits today. So for example, a lot of people in Maine are used to this. To fill your heating oil tank in the summer because the price of heating oil is going to go up when it gets cold. So if you've got a big 250-gallon tank, go ahead and fill it up when the price is low, right? So that expectation of higher prices in the future increases your demand in the short term. So. All right. So next we're going to talk about supply, but I think I'm going to pause the video here. We're at about the 8-minute mark, and then I'll make another video where we cover supply. So I'm going to pause it right here. Hopefully we've covered demand well enough.